And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this, hopefully, happy hump day with me here in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. The newest entry in our continuing series of guilty pleasure movies. This is a film that is now more than 3 decades old, is a comedy, quite funny. It spawned a brief franchise. It had 1 sequel, and it contains a who's who of all-time greats, not just of film comedies, but just in general. The film is Donald Petrie's 1993 Grumpy Old Men. Or is it Donald or his brother Daniel? I think it might be Daniel Petrie now that I'm thinking about it. I apologize. Petrie, P-E-T-R-I-E, not Petrie, like the pitcher with the Tigers in the 80s, Dan Petrie, P-E-T-R-Y. But it was directed by a guy, last name P-E-T-R-I-E. But Grumpy Old Men has 2 of the greats, 2 of the all-time legends of Hollywood, and not just in comedies, in Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. In the world of this film, they play 2, I think they're supposed to be retired. I think they were both, maybe Jack was playing older. So the thing with Jack Lemmon, he didn't age particularly well. He looked older than he was. Starting in like movies such as Save the Tiger, he looked to me like he was 10 years older than his actual age. I mean, he was, 76 when he died? He would be 100 now. He looked, to my eyes, he looked a lot older than he was in real life in the world of this film. He would not have even been 70 yet. And I feel like he looked like he was already in his 70s here. But Jack Lemmon and his old pal Walter Matthau made so many great movies together, whether it was The Fortune Cookie, whether it was The Odd Couple, whether it was even Out to Sea in the 90s, which isn't great, but it's pretty funny. And Elaine Stritch is a fucking riot. Diane Cannon gets a lot of laughs in that film. Grumpy Old Men, though, takes place in the kind of Minnesota nice area near where the movie Fargo would have been shot and set. They're in an area where you can't really have conventional fishing during the winter. You can just have ice fishing. And they play warring neighbors, 2 guys who can't stand each other. And they have had a rivalry. They were friends. And spoiler alert, they fell out over a woman who ended up being, Jack's character is John Gustafson, who ended up being John's wife. And Walter Matthau, what's his name, Max? We'll call him Max. I'm not sure what his name is. I'm drawing a blank. I think it's Max. But he had his heart set on this woman named May, who ended up being with Jack Lemmon. May has now passed, and Walter Matthau married a wonderful woman named Amy, and she has now passed, and these 2 widowers who, yeah, they're in their 70s, or they're supposed to be in their 70s. They're still fighting. And there's 2 sad components here. The first is that they grew up best friends. They weren't always enemies. The second is they fell out over this woman named May, which, if you had Jack Lemmon tell a story, she was no prize. Now that's a little bit of a crack. I don't know that I like the idea of somebody speaking ill of his past wife in that fashion. It doesn't really, I don't like that. It doesn't speak well for his character. He shouldn't have said that. I don't like that he says that, but he says it by way of pointing out your bride, the woman you ended up marrying, Amy, was a prize. You ended up doing better than me anyway. I guess that's what he's trying to get at. So they have this rivalry, and it's not a friendly rivalry. They continually try to one-up each other in sort of increasingly humorous ways. They one-up each other, and then it gets increasingly nasty, where they're almost trying to hurt one another, not just make the other look stupid, but potentially get involved in some dangerous shenanigans. But then, as if by magic, who shows up but no less than another all-timer, Anne Margaret, for a stretch in the 60s and 70s, considered the hottest woman in Hollywood by far, just as far as physical attractiveness. Gorgeous woman, great singer, incredible body, the whole thing. Jack Nicholson was with her in the movie Carnal Knowledge, a really strong actress. And in the world of this film, a lot of critics talked about this, Roger Ebert being one of them, that she shows up. She's supposed to be probably in her early 50s. I think Anne Margaret was playing somewhere near her age. And what Roger Ebert said, you could find the review, it had me howling 3 decades ago, the way he described it. He was being very careful, but I got what his point was. She's in her 50s. I think she's supposed to be 52 or 53. You got these old geezers, widowers, who are suddenly fighting over her because she's moved into the frozen tundra of Minnesota. You know, somewhere the Vikings are playing and it's still Bud Grant is the head coach and it's minus 10 degrees, but he doesn't want the players to have heated benches because it make them soft. That's true. Icy Bud Grant, great nickname. She shows up. They start fighting over her. And I got to tell you, the way that Anne Margaret looks in that movie and in this role, what is she doing hanging out with these old guys, including another all-timer, Ossie Davis, who I think is supposed to be even older than Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau? She could show up at a college and she could probably have a pick of, I don't know, any number of 24, 22, 23-year-old guys, and they would be thanking God that this hot older woman is all like. The process of the film is not, there's no scenario in which this happens. She's not going to just show up out of nowhere, also a widower. And her romantic options are Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, who are 2 decades plus older than her, even in the world of the film. But we go with it. They start to fight over her. And then Ossie Davis seems to, if you'll pardon the expression, he seems to slide in ahead of them. That's what she said. But not really, because they become friends, the Ossie Davis character and Ariel. And this sort of, what would be the phrase? It's like they're just fighting continuously and sometimes almost literally. And it looks like Walter Matthau is going to maybe get there, but it's kind of a brutal moment for Mathau's character where he thinks he's going to get a real kiss and he gets a cheek peck. And in the immortal words of Jack Nicholson, 10 years later in Something's Gotta Give, when he doesn't realize that he's not going to actually get to the finish line with Amanda Peet, he's going to have to, settle for her daughter, the still fired Diane Keaton. But in a similar vein to what happens here, where Matthau is hoping for, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and he gets a cheek peck, Jack Nicholson, when he's talking with Amanda Peet, she's supposed to be probably 40 years younger than him, and he's expecting a real kiss, and she gives him the little smooch, and as Jack says in such a brilliant line reading, down to the cheek. Down to the cheek. Well, Matthau is not down to the cheek in this film. The cheek, that's all you got. And so she focuses her attention on John Gustafson, the Jack Lemmon character, and even though he does look way too old for her, they have good chemistry. And the thing with Lemmon was, I would say, the most versatile actor of his generation. For one generation later, the answer to that question is Dustin Hoffman. Not even close. But the prior generation, the Paul Newman generation, Lemmon was the most versatile. Just an extraordinary talent. He was so good in comedies, but if you didn't know he did comedies, if all you did were watch dramas such as, Glengarry Glen Ross, if you want to go later era, such as Save the Tiger, The China Syndrome, even a film like That's Life, the man was magic up there. And there were some people who never liked his performance style, the kind of edginess, the line readings, but the guy was just a fucking boss on screen. So he and Anne Margaret have a nice back and forth. And even as we sort of settle into, okay, Walter Matthau's coming in second, and it's going to be Jack and Ariel getting together. The supporting characters make this film, it elevates the film even further. As I mentioned, Ossie Davis, but playing the father playing the father of Jack Lemmon's John Gustafson, a guy who, as I say, has got to be 70, is Burgess Meredith. And Burgess Meredith, by this point, would have been already past any of the, Rocky 5,000. He's past all the Rocky movies, and his character is probably supposed to be pushing 100, give or take. And he's the most colorful character in the film, and Burgess Meredith generates laughs on his own because his character is fucking riot. And even Walter Matthau, who can't stand John Gustafson, the dad, everybody likes the dad. And what's the secret to long life? Bacon. I wake up in the morning, bacon. What do I have for lunch? Bacon. If I want a snack, bacon. And then I drink my dinner, meaning booze. Bacon and booze. Secret to long life, as told by Burgess Meredith in Grumpy Old Men. Kevin Pollak, the stand-up comic who, he's really good in dramatic roles. A Few Good Men. He's terrific in that film. You wouldn't know he was a stand-up comic if you didn't know he was a stand-up comic. I like his performance, a little bit of a serio-comedic performance, years later with Arnold in End of Days, playing a character called Chicago. Kind of an unusual name for a character, Chicago. But Kevin Pollak in this film plays the son. I think that he's Matthau's son. See, I don't even remember. I haven't seen this film in a while. I was just had it in my head of how much I enjoyed it. But he gets together with Daryl Hannah's character. Maybe he's Lemmon's son and she's Matthau's son. It's some kind of a combination like that, where they get together. And if we're being honest, also, no offense to Kevin Pollak, he's got no business getting with Daryl Hannah. Not in the real world. Or in the movie Airplane 2. Well, not from where I'm sitting. Not from where I'm sitting. That's not a scenario. That ain't happening. But the actors also make it work. Daryl Hannah with a very peculiar, unusual, eccentric screen presence where her line readings are often off kilter. In some movies, it throws things a little bit out of whack, but in others, it's sublime. And for example, in two movies, Legal Eagles, where her character is presented as outrageously quirky and potentially a killer, it works perfectly. That's a film I think is vastly underrated. Robert Redford, Deborah Winger, Terrence Stamp, just an amazing cast and a lot of fun. But another movie where it works is Roxanne, where her character is supposed to be a brilliant, somewhat awkward, but a brilliant astronomer. And somebody whose IQ is probably 150, and the awkwardness, the pauses, and this kind of off-kilter line readings sell it. In the world of this film, I bought into her character. I really like her performance here, and despite the ridiculousness of pairing her with Kevin Pollak, it works. It works. And one other thing the movie gets right, and when I watched this film with my dad's dad, my grandpa, in Florida, we rented it from a Blockbuster. And Grandpa was already, he was already 80 or just about 80 when we saw this film. And he thought, because he was chuckling at a lot of stuff about aging, that it didn't really land for me because I wasn't even 20 yet. But the film gets into a lot of areas of not just the aging process, but how do you want to die? And it's pretty ghastly and morbid. And I remember thinking, well, it was making me uncomfortable. This is 30 years ago that I watched this film. But there's a moment where a character that are two intrepid heroes. So as much as they're fighting, they still are in each other's sphere. It's like they can't escape one another, even if they want to. This guy is ice fishing over here. That guy's ice fishing over there. And they're bench jockeying and insulting each other all the time. There's so many big laughs in this film. But there is a moment where they're not at odds at this exact second. I think they're in one of the general stores in town, and another neighbor has said, so-and-so Ralph passed away. He died last night. Oh, well, that's kind of sad. Well, what happened? Say he died in his sleep. And Walter Matthau, without missing a beat, angrily goes, "Lucky bastard." Like it's not good that he's dead, but why did he have to be so lucky to go in his sleep? He died peacefully. He wasn't in pain and he didn't suffer. All right. I guess that's one way, that's one way to look at it. So before I forget, Grumpy Old Men is free on Tubi and a couple of other streaming services. So if you haven't seen it, if you're interested, this is the kind of movie, It's not a product of its time. There are 90s comedies that are dated and will not play that well because there's some topical humor and there are concepts from that day, that time frame, that are just not going to work for somebody even, let's say, under 35 and possibly even under 40. But this is not one of those films. The themes of forgiveness, the mild themes of redemption, the themes of finding love after your life partner, your mate, has passed. These are not concepts that meant anything to me seeing this movie as a kind of a punk pain in the ass college kid. I enjoyed the film, but what I'm saying at this point didn't mean anything to me. I never would have given a second thought to the idea of a second chance at love later in life. Whatever, but I get it. I understand. And the process here for the guys, absurd as it may be, that the still hot Anne Margaret is fixating on Jack Lemmon's John Gustafson in particular, but they still have more life to live. And just because you get to a certain age, as Arnold Schwarzenegger said in Terminator, I think it was Terminator Genesis, you can be old, but it doesn't mean you're obsolete. You can be over the hill as far as your former professional life, but you're still allowed to get as much out of every day as humanly possible. And if you meet somebody that lights that fire within your soul, you go for it. You don't say, well, my wife only died 5 years. No. We only get one shot here, and you got to go for it. You got to take it. And that ultimately is what John Gustafson does. He goes for it. Spoiler alert. It's a movie with a happy ending without going into specifics, but still with the pranks and the silliness, and Walter Matthau clearly ad-libbing. And I think Jack Lemmon really wasn't as much of an ad-libber. There's the kind of a funny moment. If you watch on YouTube, they have some goofs that were originally at the back of, I think it might have been at the end credits, that they ran some, like a gag reel and some goofs. And there is a moment in the film, this is in the movie, where Walter Matthau he's taking a bath. He's getting himself prepped and, freshening up for his date with the spectacular Anne Margaret as Ariel. And we see this in the film, but there's an outtake where Matthau is literally scrubbing, and he goes, "If I knew there was going to be a nude scene, I'd have demanded an extra $1 million." And you hear the cast and crew crack up. So obviously that was not a take that was going to be in the film. Matthau was kind of legendary for being a big gambler, and I don't think his net worth was quite as much as it should have been. He was always just pissing it away on ridiculous stuff, whether it was at the track or whether it was shooting craps or being in the casinos or tipping the dealers hundreds of dollars. Matthau was that kind of guy, likable guy, whatever. But this is a really good movie. It was a box office hit. I think it grossed just over 3 times production cost. I want to say the film cost about $20 million to produce and market, and it grossed 70 plus, that kind of global gross. So anytime a major studio film such as this goes 3+ times over production costs, that's a hit. And it was the kind of hit, the word of mouth was really good. And I've talked about 1993 in particular as being, in my opinion, the single best year Hollywood ever had. And this is one of the better comedies of the year. Just off the top of my head, what are some of the best comedies of 93? Well, my favorite comedy is Woody Allen's Manhattan Murder Mystery, which is a completely different kind of film than this. This is bawdy humor, a lot of slapstick, a lot of Home Alone style sort of angry pranks where you might potentially harm the other person. Manhattan Murder Mystery has the screwball comedy Nick and Nora mystery kind of thrust. It's a way better film. I have Manhattan Murder Mystery in my Woody Allen all-time top 5. Grumpy Old Men, entertaining as it is not in the top 5. Might be in the top 10, but it's certainly not in the top 5 of either Walter Matthau or Jack Lemmon. But it is a really entertaining film. It has a good message, and despite all of the nasty business between the two leads, it has a good heart. And you leave this movie, when it's over, you leave the movie feeling good. That you watch something that was meaningful, and even with all of the gags, the sight gags, and the insults that they lob back and forth, it's going to be more of a hold-up than a stick-up if you get with her, making all kinds of dick jokes and stuff like that. But the film ultimately is heartwarming, and I could see why it was so successful and why they made the sequel. The sequel is not as good. It's not even close to being as good as the original, but I would say it's still worth seeing just for the guys, because Lemmon and Matthau, they were like ball and glove. There are some personalities that just work on screen. To a much lesser extent, Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes. They had that kind of 3-movie arc, if you will. They had some scenes together in Wildcats, and then, of course, White Men Can't Jump, and then Money Train. But Matthau and Lemmon, they were just gold. They were so good at what they did. They were so good at connecting with the audience, connecting with the characters on screen, and making you care about them in the world of the movie, even if their characters said things or took actions which under normal circumstances you'd be like, no, I can't be with this guy. But they just had that. They had that special quality where you just wanted to like them anyway. Grumpy Old Men, directed by, I think, Daniel Petrie, from 1993, the newest entry in our continuing series of guilty pleasure movies, starring Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, Anne Margaret, Ossie Davis, Kevin Pollak, and Daryl Hannah. This has been episode 465, or is it 466, of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your happy hump day, hopefully, evening here with me in New York. But if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.